Okay, great. All right, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I'm Amy Lene, the project manager from Boston Parks and Recreation, overseeing this project. I do want to thank you for your participation in this meeting. I know it's a beautiful evening out there, so we do really appreciate you being here tonight. I do want to welcome any elected officials and staff who may be on the call. Just please raise your hand if you'd like to say something. All right, and let's go to the next slide, please. So a few things that we just want to go over before the presentation. So please note that this meeting is being recorded. That way we can post it to the project webpage, and that should take a few days. We'll add the link for that project webpage in the chat. So if you'd like to view this presentation again or share it with neighbors who were unable to attend tonight. And then during the presentation, we ask that you keep your video off and microphone muted. During the discussion session, we encourage you to turn your video on if you feel comfortable doing so. And next slide, please. Oh, there we go, virtual meeting. Sorry, you can go back one. We do want everyone to feel comfortable sharing their questions and comments, either verbally or in the chat. So just a reminder to be respectful of others and mindful of everyone's time. You're also welcome to reach out to me directly via email if you want to provide additional comments or discuss the project further. My email is on this slide, but we'll also add that to the chat. Next slide, please. I think everyone's pretty familiar with Zoom at this point, but during the presentation, we just ask you to hold your comments, your verbal comments, but feel free to add anything to the chat, and then we'll address those after the presentation. If you want to speak during that presentation, during the discussion session, and you're on Zoom, just raise your hand and we will unmute you. And then if anyone is calling in on a phone, just use *9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to unmute and mute again. And then the agenda. So we're going to start with an introduction of the project team, and then we'll look at an overview of the project, including the schedule. Our design team is then going to go through a presentation summarizing the feedback that we've heard so far, going over an analysis of the site context and the existing conditions, and then the proposed design concepts for the park. And this will be followed by a listening and discussion session where we hope to get your input on those ideas in the concept plans. And then last we'll go over is the closing remarks and next steps. So once again, I'm Amy Lene. I'm the project manager from Boston Parks. Shauna Dixon from Boston Parks is moderating for us tonight, so thank you, Shauna. Eric James and Ross Cochran are not able to join us tonight, but they're important team members from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services. They're always great resources for community concerns. And then CBA is our landscape architecture firm working on this project. And joining us tonight, we have Megan Tompkins and Amy Foster. So this is an overview of kind of our public park design approach. So this includes community input, such as this meeting tonight, safety guidelines and regulatory guidelines, such as ADA, and then the City of Boston priorities and the Parks and Recreation goals. Next slide. So those Parks and Recreation goals are things that we really think about when we're working on any design and construction project. So they include creating spaces that are accessible and available to all. So thinking about all users and what features are best suited for the greatest accessibility. Creating spaces that have a diverse, balanced, and efficient mix of uses, so serving as many people's interests as possible, that include meaningful and inclusive community engagement. So like these meetings tonight, we really want to hear the community's input and hope that everyone feels engaged and involved. And then in the process, that leads to more stewardship of the renovated park. And then incorporating adaptive and resilient landscapes, so designing for current and future challenges with climate change, and then promoting connections between spaces and people. And next slide. So this is the second design meeting for the Walsh Playground Improvement Project. We'll use the feedback from tonight's meeting to develop a single concept plan, and then we'll present that likely in November or early December. And then the design team will move forward from that point with construction documents, and we expect construction to start next summer. So with that, I will turn it over to Amy Foster from CBA.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to quickly provide everyone with a little bit of context as to how we arrived where we are by the end of the presentation. So on June 29th, we had our first community presentation. We put together a presentation about a lot of site analysis of the existing conditions in neighborhood, and then put that in front of the community to get input on their perception of the existing conditions. What's working, what's not working, what needs to be updated, what needs to be changed. So I'm not going to run through all of this text because it'll be posted online later, and you guys can go watch the first presentation that's also published online if you want that context. But that's just a little bit of context to move into the next slide, where we had a second meeting, which was a park pop-up on August 17th, to be able to gather more feedback from the community and have more one-on-one conversations and more face-to-face conversations to kind of gather additional levels of feedback about how people are using the park and what they want. And so again, I'll just flip through this quickly, but we got so much great feedback from you guys. Thank you so much to everybody who showed up. It was really meaningful feedback. And I'll kind of go into our next level of information gathering so far on the next slide, which was a online survey, which we gathered 51 responses between August 17th and September 22nd. It recently closed. And we found that we were able to gather information from mostly local residents and a couple others, primarily people who are close enough to walk or bike to the site, and a few user groups who do come to the site by car. And the vast majority of our respondents visit the park either daily, multiple times a week, or weekly. So we were definitely hearing feedback from heavy park users. And going into the next slide, we ask questions about what users typically do, what's their favorite feature, and what areas should be prioritized for improvement. And we certainly have some trends and some nuances here, but to be honest, one of our biggest takeaways was that there's a pretty wide spread of interest in the different amenities that we have. And the kind of variety of amenities are kind of well appreciated by the community, as well as there being some kind of target areas of concern. So I'll just keep moving forward. We asked a couple of open response questions, and I just want to clarify with everybody who participated, we have been word for word reading every single one of your responses to all of the open response questions. So if you don't see your comment represented here, I just want you to know we've really been parsing through all of them. We're continuing to reflect back on them, and we just picked out some of the recurring themes that we got in the open responses. And to summarize, we really did find that people had a variety of interests and really valued the fact that the park is multi-use, that it accommodates a range of users. There's kids, there's older people, there's teenagers, and it's really a community gathering space with its own little neighborhood culture. And one of the features of this park that you might not find in other parks is the big hill that is kind of valued for multiple reasons. And generally the park is valued as kind of a quiet, open green space. So on the next slide, we asked about what safety concerns are for the park, because those are always going to be one of our biggest priorities to fix. We had a lot of mentions related to maintenance and cleanliness concerns about garbage and litter. We had a lot of overlapping with maintenance concerns about the overgrown vegetation in many different ways, interfering with the various program and the condition of the lawn and the condition of the fields. We had concerns about visitor misuse, and while we can't always enforce perfect behavior from every visitor, we can design in mind with ways to kind of deter certain behaviors with design decisions. So we'll definitely be valuing that feedback. There's a lot of mentions about lack of lighting in the park, and that was also named as one of the biggest priorities of renovation, was to include more lighting. And then just general amenity condition concerns, concerns about drainage, and concerns about the utilities, mainly in the big multi-use field. So we can go to the next slide. I'm representing some information that we went over in our last presentation. So I'll continue to go fairly quickly. Generally, we just looked at the neighborhood because we want to see where are people coming from, who are our users, and what are the amenities that are already available to people in the neighborhood, and what amenities are not already available to people. So this is just kind of a quick look at the neighborhood, which I'm sure most of our viewers are pretty familiar with. So I'll just skip forward again to the closer neighborhood conditions. And this really just shows us what we know, that this is really a residential neighborhood, and it's a residential neighborhood park. And there are some multi-uses and some businesses nearby. But for the most part, we're looking at a really residential feeling park. We looked at some historic maps as kind of a context and also a little bit of inspiration from 1870. You can see we're working with a natural hill topography and a little stream running through the corner of the site. By 1874, it looks like they had started to gather some of that water on site. And by 1904, we can see there's a planned street to go through the site, and a utility corridor. We have commissioned a survey of the site that does show a lot of utility lines, which kind of explains a lot of the utility caps throughout the park, and some of those are active, and we will be diving deeper into that and working with some of these complex utilities as well. So I can go next slide. And then we also looked at historic aerials from the slightly more recent past. In the last 70 years, you can see in 1955, kind of our present park had really taken shape with you can see the kind of shadows of the hill and the topography and what looks like two baseball or softball fields, and basically the same geometry of that main path. By 1983, we have our basketball court and tennis court in place, and in the early 2000s, the current playground was installed. Which brings us to today's existing conditions. Again, we really have gone over a lot of the existing conditions in more detail in our last presentation, but we have just kind of evaluated. We have our softball fields, basketball court, tennis court, playground, main primary path, a big hill, a lot of vegetation, and generally, as we kind of found in our conversations and from visiting the park and on our survey, everything is kind of well appreciated as an amenity, but the existing conditions are fairly run down and in need of renovations and upgrade pretty much universally across all of these amenities. Yeah, so I think with that, I can hand it off to Megan.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Tompkins. I'm principal at CBA Landscape Architects. I obviously work with Amy Foster and Amy Linnae at BPRD. And I'm going to talk through the initial design exercise we've undertaken to start, developing a new design for Walsh Playground. And I want to sort of preface, I know we have some images here. Nobody get too excited yet. I'd like to preface this by saying that typically when we do our first pass at design for a park, we try to put together a few options. Often one is very similar to what is already there. And then we try to show the community, some different ideas. I will say for Walsh, because many of the site elements that are there are really well appreciated. The program is pretty similar in all the proposed options. So there's most of the same elements are showing up in most of the proposed options. And the other thing that I always like to say when I intro a design is we like to think about this as a sort of kit of parts. So if we're showing you 3 options, you do not have to decide on one in its entirety, and that is 100% what is going to be built. At this point, design is very schematic. We still want a lot of feedback from you, the users. And if you end up liking one part of option A and one part of option B, and that's kind of like what everyone in the community is really into, or the majority of people. We'll do our best to sort of combine those so we get all of the desired things. So that said, there are a few things that were identified as sort of general, like Amy Foster said, a lot of the program is well liked, like very universally well liked. So we propose improving most of the things that are already there. So that means renovating the softball fields, that means renovating the tennis court, basketball court, renovating the playground, and then making some improvements to the pathways. So one of our sort of a universal addition that shows up in all 3 options is a new walking loop, which I can talk about a little more later on. And also, just improving the gate and the entry, especially on Washington Street, where that's, the main entry to the park. So this is a general proposed renovation slide. Another sort of set of things that would show up in any of the 3 options I'm going to show are new site furniture. We are not showing benches here, but we do mean to show benches. We show them in later slides. There are currently no bike racks at the park, so bike racks would be a great thing, for bike users, obviously. And then one of the general additions is adding a drinking fountain with a bottle filler station, and also adding pedestrian scale lighting along the main path through the park. So not sports lighting, not perimeter lighting, just for basically lighting for safety along the main pathway. A few things that had also been talked about that are sort of general and could show up in any option are signage, so like wayfinding signage. And we know that there is currently a porta potty on site, so we could consider, designating a space for that so it doesn't necessarily move around from year to year. It may, maybe maybe adding a porta potty enclosure. And then another set of sort of general improvements that we would be adding to any of the options that I'm going to show imminently. Renovating the field. So this is basically that multi-use field that is the outfields for the two softball fields. When we say renovating here, we mean reseeding, we mean improving drainage so there are not puddling or, puddling areas or wet, boggy areas. And navigating the utility covers, as Amy mentioned, there are quite a few, and we know they're not great to play around. We'd also like to replace the perimeter fence, add a mow strip to hopefully cut down on a lot of that overgrown vegetation, especially along Clancy Road. Maintain and keep existing shade trees, add new shade trees, and potentially other ornamental plantings if there's a desire for that. And then do some real pruning for health and safety of existing trees to remain, and potentially removing invasive plants and understory plants. So visibility is better in those like wooded pockets on site. So all that to say, those 3 slides that I just showed you are general. We're considering that these things would be part of any of these designs. And now I'm going to move on to show you our 3 options so far. And I know these are really tiny. We have a bunch more slides to go. We'll show them larger. But here they are. So I'd like to introduce to you option A. I would say this is probably the most similar to the park layout that exists right now. The softball fields are in generally the same place, except that left-hand softball field. It's the west field, the one that's currently used for practice. We're flipping that down to the south end of that big lawn area. I think we can still fit the outfields with sort of a small amount of overlap. And the great thing about flipping where the backstop is in this scheme is that it is no longer at the bottom of the hill where sledders are potentially going to sled into it. Apologies, I have a little cough. So very similar to the park as it is. The tennis court and basketball court are in generally the same area, except we're flipping the tennis court to a north-south orientation, which is generally better for that kind of a court. And it also gets the court further away from people's houses, from abutters. Playground is in almost exactly the same space as it currently is. So it doesn't affect the existing trees very much, which is one of our big goals and, one of the Parks Department's goals. We're also adding shade and seating areas, both near the playground and near the Washington Street softball field. And one of the things that I did not address in my sort of general improvements slide is a splash pad, but we would be adding a splash pad to any of these options. So that's a top priority for the city. It's great for combating heat island effect in the summer. And I think it just makes sense. Jeez. So the other thing here for option A is that we're showing a fence, an interior fence around the playground. So we know there's a perimeter fence around the whole park. There were some comments about fencing and dogs and playground users kind of interacting. So so sorry. So for this option, we're showing a fence around the playground. Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to show some of those precedent images for just this option. We would be showing new play structures for all age groups. So that would be generally 2 to 5-year-olds and 5 to 12-year-olds. Other items. So sorry. Other items like swings, spinners, bouncers, things like that. Oh my goodness. So, and then this slide, we're also showing sort of a traditional style bench, shade structure. In this case, this one is curved. And pickleball striping. This has come up a couple of times, not strongly for this park, but it is something that we could consider including. And also a splash pad. Okay, I'm going to move on to option B. All right. So option B is a little different. I would say this option might be the biggest change from the existing conditions. In this option, we are down to one softball field, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But one of the things that came up in all of the feedback from the first meeting and from the park pop-up was interest for a dog park or a designated dog area. So in this case, I think to meet sort of the city's desired guidelines for a dog park area, which is a certain size, it's 10,000 square feet, and a certain distance from residential abutters. So we're holding this 100 feet away from the back of the properties on Pleasant Hill Ave, and a certain material, which is like a pea stone. This dog park sort of takes the place of that second softball field. So I think in this one, there's a little bit of a trade-off. The other thing to notice here is that the playground and the courts have flipped places. So we're not losing a lot of those existing shade trees, just because the tennis court and the basketball court are shown where the existing playground is right now. And then the playground sort of takes up that space that the basketball court is in. The other thing to note on this option, so we still have the splash pad that's in all three options. We still have shade, so we're showing a shade structure near the dog park and also near the playground and splash pad. We're also showing a fitness loop, so fitness stations along a little loop path. And one thing I did not note early on in my presentation, if you can see those three kind of light rectangles in the grass lawn, we were looking at how we could fit 3 flag football fields. So they are a little bit wedged in, but they are in there in each option. All right, thanks. I'm going to move on to the precedent images for option B. So for this option, we wanted to show some slightly different playground equipment, a little more focused on climbing, a little, taller, maybe a little more monumental, and also responding to some of the feedback that we got at the pop-up. Kids had asked for a zip line, and they'd also asked for a climbing wall. So we're showing them here. Of course, that can be combined with any other, layout. One of the things that we're showing in each option is an accessible, some sort of accessible play item, but we would be working this into any option to the greatest extent that we can. All right. And then for option B, we wanted to show more of those sort of different, different materials for the things that we're showing. So graphics on the splash pad, a sort of blocky shade structure, a more modern bench, things like that. So we can always come back to that. All right, and then option C. Option C is a little different from the first two. The main things are the program is all here. So we have the same two softball fields with that slight overlap in the outfields. The three, the three flag football fields, that walking loop path. So this is one of the things that I think I talked about during sort of general items. This walking loop path really responds to a lot of community comments about, wanting a little more like of a standardized walking space. We know that people walk around the fields as it is. I think this would be helpful for elders, for folks with strollers. And the idea is that we could mark it the distance. So you could also, get your steps in, know that you've maybe walked a mile and a half, whatever you're after. So option C, the two softball fields, we are moving the playground closer to the lower softball field backstop, adding a seating area with a shade structure between the two. And then kind of stacking the tennis court and the basketball court along the west side of that softball field with a single station fitness equipment area, and the splash pad sort of tucked in the corner. And I will note that this playground, as shown, is pretty large, and the actual footprint will probably adjust. And the actual footprint of any of these playgrounds that we're showing will probably adjust as we continue to develop the design. All right, so for this option, we're showing a little bit of a more traditional playground type. We would call that a post and platform, with some fun slides, fun climbers, things like that. We're also showing musical instruments, monkey bars, spinners. Those things were also, requested at the community pop-up meeting. And then swings and sort of a ramp accessibility. So these are all things that we can, look at for this option or any other. And along with that, we're showing another pergola type, some other graphic, splash pad graphics. This splash pad also is showing above ground sprays, which is something we could talk about later on. Sort of artistic basketball court graphics, and then that sort of single structure outdoor gym. So going to move on to our sort of final option slide where you can see the three together. I think I might pause here for a minute, just to sort of show the three different things. They're all pretty similar, but they are all a little different. They all keep a lot of the robust program that is already at this park. All right. So I think at this point, I will hand the speaking role back over to Amy Linnae to sort of facilitate the listening and discussion session. I think I will flip back to the three option slides though, just to have that for reference in case folks want to point things out or ask questions.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, and we may want to jump around to the larger plans to talk about specific comments. We have a couple comments in the chat, so we'll start to address those unless anyone wanted to jump in with verbal comments or questions. Okay, so Brian, option C, kills the hill. So I think unless you want to speak to that, it sounds, cannot unmute yourself. Okay, if you raise your hand, we can certainly unmute you.
Hi, I am Carrie Ann Gordon, and thank you so much for all of these options. And I hate being really negative, but it's not my thing. But I think does one of the questions is, does the walking loop kill the hill that kids actually sled on?
So I'd love to speak to this. So the walking loop is at the foot of the hill, and we put a lot of thought into placing it where it will be flat at the bottom and that there will be no barriers. It will be paved, but I mean, hopefully there's enough snow to be a cushion at that point over the 6 feet width of pavement. Um, we tried to design these as barrier free on the hill as possible to keep it for sledding.
Okay. And then my other question is that what for the basketball courts? The basketball courts are one of the items that's used most frequently. Like it, did you consider expanding them a little?
Expanding like a second basketball court or
Yes. Well, yeah, because I see that you give a lot of precedence to flag football and dogs and everything else. But the basketball court is one of, and its kids are always like piled up trying to use one hoop or the other. That is literally one of the most used field. I know used items. I know a lot of other things are very aspirational, but that is actually really used today.
so adding a second one hasn't been suggested yet, so I do really appreciate that suggestion. I think that we would have to lose another program item, but I I mean we can work that out if that's what folks want.
So that's just one of my comments because again, it is the most used feature. One of the most used feature by actual residents, not just people coming in to use the fields and stuff like that. I will reserve some of my comments till I hear other people. So I'll mute for
thanks,
now.
Carrie. And yeah, no, we appreciate that. And I think that's, certainly understanding how different programs gets prioritized is really what we want to understand. And, of course, there's always maybe different priorities among different people, but I think it's a good comment that you bring up because, I think that the kids that are out there using it probably aren't necessarily joining us on Zoom. And we did have the chance to interact with some of them when we were out in the pop-up in the park. But I think that's, great feedback. So thank you. Okay, so Shauna, are you able to unmute?
Hi, this
Virginia,
is Virginia.
you're
Yeah,
unmuted.
hi.
Okay, great.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I'd like to also to second, I do think the basketball courts are used really heavily and a lot of people leave because it's not available. So they go and they see that both of the nets are taken or there's one full game on. So then they leave or come back later. So I do agree that I think it would be interesting to add another basketball court. Some of my concerns, I guess I don't know about the shade, but where you put the splash pads are probably the most shaded places. So I just about getting the sun and sort of being able to utilize that during all of the day and not being stuck in the shade, it'd be a concern. And then for options C and A, you're really getting closer to the houses that are on St. Gregory Street. And so I'm concerned that I don't see more proposed trees or I don't know, maybe that's because I think the existing tree canopies and all of that are existing, but I would like to see some more proposed natural blockage, A, for the sound and also for privacy.
So
And
the
I
trees,
also, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to let you know that the trees as shown are very schematic, so that's great feedback. And I know that that feedback was provided during the last meeting and the park pop-up, so we will increase tree planting along any edges where there's residences.
Great. And yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, I guess my last thing is that I appreciate trying to do a lot in one park, but I think that we don't have to have everything in every park. And so I feel like there's Dorchester Park up the street that allows a lot of room for dogs. There's a dog park up there. So I'm just not like, I just feel like if this is really supposed to be a family friendly, if you're going to have kids in a splash park, then maybe it's not also the greatest place for a dog park. So I just feel like we don't have to do everything in this one park, and I'd really like to have more open space. We're all living so close together. I think these parks are a great place to just also just breathe in and not have to see so much traffic and congestion. And I don't want to see that in a park either.
Great. Thanks, Virginia. That's very helpful. Okay, so let's see. Brian. Donna, can you unmute Brian?
I did. He should be able to speak now. I don't know where he went. Not sure where he went, but I'll unmute the next person.
Okay, well, then we'll keep an eye out for Brian. Okay. Hey, Deborah.
Deborah.
Did you unmute me? Hi,
Yeah, hi.
can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ditto the first two of my neighbors, Virginia, and I'm sorry I lost the person before her. But I agree with them both regarding the basketball courts. And I do specifically remember as one of my add-ons was to have a double basketball court because of the age differences also that play in that on the basketball courts. Sometimes the boys are much older, I should say, or either young men. And then sometimes they're in another age group. So it's very difficult for them to play together on that one. So I think adding a second basketball court would be awesome, opposed to, and again, no disrespect to the dogs, but if we have to lose the dog park, I would rather have a double basketball court opposed to a dog park. That's my cue for now. Oh, the other thing is that I know I can go online and get these images, but it would be helpful just to be able to have like something, I guess, hard copy to like keep looking at when you did these three options. Just something I can keep flipping back and forth to be able to say these are some of the things that I think would be really helpful to the park, and maybe share with my neighbors that are not on right now.
Great. Thanks, Deborah. Okay.
Hi.
Evie.
Yes, hi. I'm gonna make my comment about the dogs, but first I just want to add another plus for someone who lives on St. Gregory around the need for a second basketball court. I also think when you compare with what's available in Dorchester Park, where there is tennis options, I think if you had to choose one, the second basketball would be even more utility in Walsh. What I was going to talk about though was, as a parent of two young kids, it does make me nervous the way dogs have just free reign in the field and all around. And so currently, so that's why I like the thought of a dog park, because then there's a place for them to kind of go. But I was a little concerned similarly, and I see it in option B, that it's right next to the playground. And I didn't know if there was a way at all to have a dog park and a playground and have them not be right next to each other. So I was just curious if having one requires that the playground be near it.
I don't think it does. Yeah, no, I don't think it does. I think it just made sense while we were doing this exercise. We just have to probably move around the other, the courts and the playgrounds and the dog park to get them separated.
And actually, I was going to ask Phoebe if the concern about dogs loose on the field, if that makes the case for having the how people feel, I guess, about the playground being fenced in, because from some feedback we've gotten, I think people feel like that's preferable to have the playground enclosed if there's not an enclosed dog park area, just to keep that sort of division for safety. So if you have thoughts on that, it'd be great to hear. Oh, I guess now you're muted, right? Okay, so we'll move to Shauna. Are you able to unmute Anne?
Hi, thank you. I have like 5 different hands in this, different hats on for this. So one thing I was thinking of is maybe it was EB was saying that sometimes the kids showing up at basketball, the little guys are a little intimidated to be playing with some bigger folks. You could think about using the tennis court and running like 2 half courts of basketball, like like they do in the gym, where you have your full court, but then you also have some side baskets so that kids can play short side. So you could use the tennis court, could still be lined for tennis, but you could have one short side. So younger kids could play a half court, they play 2 baskets. I don't mean half court in the sort of traditional, take it back to the foul line, but a shorter court they'd be able to play basketball on. And that might be more appealing for younger kids and sort of provide another spot. So that's one idea, to try to sort of over maximize what you have. I agree with the frustration of, and I'm a dog owner, but I don't bring my dog to Dorchester Park because it's not actually a real dog park with a fence. And so people's dogs just run all over the place, and my dog doesn't really enjoy other dogs. So we have to walk in other places. So I like the idea of dogs having a designated place with a fence around it. But I'd be okay if that got built at Dorchester Park and not necessarily at Walsh, because it's away from the playground. The place folks bring their dogs right now is already away from the playground. So for the folks from parks, considering taking some of that diamond space in Dorchester Park and making it an actual real designated dog park, might allow folks who want a dog space to go to Dorchester Park and allow Walsh Park to not have to be everything for all people. Another sort of space saver might be that the second softball diamond, because it is typically used more as a practice space, or we could, as somebody who does the scheduling for ADSL, I could certainly schedule it for the smaller kids. You could make it a challenger size or a T-ball size, which if you look at the park in Savin Hill and McConnell, there's a full-size softball diamond, and there's also what they call the challenger field, and that is a smaller diamond, but that totally works for little kids as long as it's still softball and doesn't have a mound. So that would give you a little more green space, and you could still, for ADSL, we would be able to have the older girls playing on the primary field closer to Washington Street and have the younger kids playing closer to the playground, which is better in terms of their family. If they've got younger siblings and whatnot, that's a good location because their kids have a place to be as well. So that sort of lays out nicely. And I like the idea of getting that backstop away from kids sledding into it, because that's like my nightmare every time we go sledding. I agree with Virginia. We need sun on the spray park. Like, it's not fun to be cold at the spray park. and I agree with whoever was in the comments about the danger of the changeover from clay to grass back and forth between flag football and softball. It's dangerous for all involved. It's dangerous for flag football players because their footing changes. It's dangerous for softball players because they come out and their infield is all beat up, and if it's been wet, then it's really hard for parks to maintain a good infield surface. So then kids are turning their ankles in the infield. So as much as you can, those are just, I'm trying to be constructive with my feedback and like give ideas on how to maybe make some tweaks. You may have to go with 2 flag football fields if you want them to all be grass, but they would be actually good and safe for everybody. But I like the idea of trying to get more usage for our young people who are coming to the park, not necessarily in programmed, but of their own volition. So making sure that the basketball players are never leaving frustrated because there's no space would definitely be top of my list as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. That's a lot of great feedback. Okay, we got Brian back. Hey, Brian. I think you're unmuted. Is that? Oh. I think you're muted again.
I just allowed for him to unmute, so I'm not sure what's happening.
Am I unmuted now?
There we go.
You got it.
Sorry about that. I was just thanking you for your efforts, rearranging this. There's so much going on and trying to add additional elements. I think we all have things that we want to see, in particular, or don't want to see. And it's kind of like a laundry list in a lot of ways. And I know that's hard to deal with. I, for one, we use the park, at least weekly, bi-weekly at times, in addition to dot park. A fenced-in play area, really, for me, is it's kind of a difficult. It's a bit of a no-no. Just with little kids' imaginations, it's nice to have them not encounter a fence. I understand at different other parks, there's reasons for it. At this park, there hasn't been to date. So if they want to just run off and go across the field, that's frequently what we end up doing. We do it with different people because we never met before. We run up the hill, like both hills. We run up both of them. The wild areas in this park, they used to be a lot more upkept and a lot more accessible. And that's basically just the 2 wild areas. The one on Washington Street and then the other one at the bottom of the hill are no longer resources. Hopefully wildlife uses them. The wild wooded aspect of this has kind of gotten lost in some of these designs. I don't know if that's really been prioritized. Having a natural element is, for me, that's where a child's mind is. For instance, I'm looking at design A, and I'm wondering, that giant rock that's there, is not on the schematics. I'm looking at design B, and I don't see it. Is that something that's going to be sandblasted? Is that not a feature? So I just wonder if enough thought has been given to the natural elements of the park. And that includes, both on design C, B and C. That hill, the slope of the hill is now running directly into either a basketball court that's maybe going to be fenced, or a dog park, which is going to maybe be fenced, and a play area, again, that's maybe going to be fenced. I know the Boston Globe had a piece naming Walsh Park one of the top 10 sledding parks in Boston. If you have sled this park, that is the area you want to sled. It's the longest hill. It's the best part to sled. All the rest of this area, you see the topography of it just becomes incredibly steep. Moving the ballpark from there so there's not a backstop and a bench. That sounds great, but you know, if we're like in design B, we're just losing it to a fenced-in dog park. So, you know, it's a lot of things to juggle, and you know, good luck with it. Those are some of my concerns, you know, number one being the fences, number two being the wooded areas and the various, you know, features that we all feel are natural parts of the park, like the rocks, you know, maintaining those areas more is more number one to me than any fancy design. So anyhow, that's where I'm at. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Those are great comments.
I just wanted to piggyback on Brian and say that I agree regarding the fenced in playground. I don't 100% oppose this dog park thing. If I had my druthers, I would say, can we just lose that? But if you're going to fence anything in, it needs to be the dog park and not the children.
Thanks, Deborah. That's a good comment. Helpful to hear. I think we're getting some great great input here. So okay, Carrie Ann.
Hi, me again. I said it in my comments, but I will reiterate it. I would lose the dog park. I like dogs well enough, but it seems again that you're not prioritizing the people who actually use it, like the softball players, the basketball players, the kids who go to the park. And also, one of the things I didn't say that I liked was the porta potty, because of the fact that there's a porta potty sometimes, but it's not accessible to the kids. And that has been historically an issue where it's only accessible to certain people. And that's not really great or fair or right. And I've seen a lot of accidents happen. A lot of kids have to go home early because of the lack of porta potty use. And, you know, I've lived like a street or two away from it. So it's easy enough for me to run home, or if you had a friend closer, you sometimes use their facilities. But we should, like, I've seen too many accidents happen because there aren't porta potties that are accessible to us. They're chained up for other people. So I did want to mention that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I was trying to understand, I was trying to track down the origin of the one that's out there, because I think it wasn't one of our, well, you know, who holds that contract? Because if we can put one in that we would obviously keep open all the time, and then, you know, would be responsible for the maintenance and upkeep. So I think that's definitely important for a place where kids are playing and adults are playing and everything. So thanks for that comment. Yeah, I'm gonna just try to check through the chat.
There are a lot of great comments in the chat as well. I really appreciate all of this. It helps a lot.
Absolutely, yeah, very helpful. I think, yeah, and I think with the dog park, you know, it's something that we decided to show one option with that because we've gotten some feedback requests for dog parks, but I think in general our goal is to prioritize, kids, adults, dogs, maybe secondary to that. So, and as you can see, it takes up a fair amount of space, so it's sacrificing some other element. So I think hearing generally that people aren't in favor of that is really helpful. Frees up space for something else like a second basketball court, or so that's helpful to hear. And yeah, I think understanding that the sledding hill is important to everyone, so that's good to know. Yeah, I think in terms of the fields, the sort of multi-purpose field use and softball field, it's certainly spatially a little challenging, since, given the slopes and some of those existing wooded areas, we are somewhat constrained to what we can fit. And no one has brought it up here, but I've had some conversations about, synthetic turf, and it's something that we're not entertaining here because there's natural turf on the fields now. So I'll just bring that up just to say that, that does alleviate the issue with the overlapping program and fields, but we're definitely staying with the natural turf in this park. So trying to fit everything in, I think, is just a spatial challenge, and we're sort of working through I think that in different approaches, but definitely helpful hearing what people see as the priorities. Okay, does anyone have anything else? Any other questions or comments? Looks like we got a couple here. Carrie Ann.
I just want to I know we haven't talked about the playground a lot because of the fact of the other features, but I am really excited to bring some new features, climbing, zip lining, whatever it is. Just having, I feel like a lot of features in Walsh Park was put in to deter use for older kids, like that big mound and the no lights and stuff like that. And I would love to see it just be a much more inclusive playground and an inclusive space where it's not all of these traps to deter actual usage of it. And I just really want great play structures that kids can actually use.
Yeah, I think it'll be a big improvement to what, what's out there now. And obviously the surfacing is really deteriorated. So Megan, did you want to say anything about that, or?
Nope. No, I agree. I think it'll be great.
See, Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, I also agree. And, I just wanted to reiterate my daughter, who, when I was also looking at this and we've utilized this park, she was saying she'd like new stuff, but when she was a kid or appreciates playgrounds that have simple things because it allows your imagination. And she was saying, oh, she's left now because she's up, that, she likes parks to be simple. And that's really important. As as a youth for her, is that it really keeps simple, and maybe that's also the feedback I am giving as well. So I'm just curious with option B, like I'm just trying to figure out all of these things because one thing, all of these other extra structures for exercise and these other pathways, because somebody also had mentioned in the chat that this park is often used for many different things. And one of them is like at the end of the school year, so many schools come and have like an end of the year like fair or program where they're doing lots of different activities. And I feel like some of these are like breaking into their space of where they either have these activities separate or like they're stationing their equipment. And so I just want to also be mindful of how people are using this park too. Like I think we see for all those who live near it, know that, come May, the park is frequently used during the day by a number of schools and a number of programs. And there have been family reunions and all of that. So I just wanted to be mindful of that as well. And option B sort of makes me nervous just about getting into that space.
Thanks. That's a good reminder, definitely.
And for those school activities, are they setting up on the fields or sort of tucked away in the woods near like where the basketball court is? I mean, like to the plan, like below that on the plan, if you happen to notice like where those what spaces they're using primarily. Oh, sorry, Virginia. Muted again. Okay, we'll get
Sorry,
back
can you
up
hear me
there.
now?
Yeah.
So what they do is most of the time they are behind sort of my house, which is at this, if you're looking at A, it's where the playground is. And so many of them go near the playground to set up shop, or I'll use that kind of open area that's near the basketball court and tennis courts, but on like the grass part. And then they're having all of their activities in the wide open space. And then a lot of them like section it off, whether it's like, and then they'll have different like activities in that open spot. And then they'll do their eating or whatever activities sort of near the playground and near the basketball courts.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, so having some kind of flexible space that's maybe not designated for a specific program, but could function that way. I think, no, it's interesting you say that, because then we also did get some comments, I think sort of pushback on any kind of like picnicking area. People sort of were concerned about that leading to more noise disruption or trash. So we really aren't including any, specifically like picnic tables, but I think in what you're saying is if these activities, they bring in tents and things like that. So that's helpful to know. Okay, and then Brian.
No, my comments are in the chat, just about the wild areas have just been relegated in these plans, just to be, so there's no intention as far as I can tell to do anything particular with them, and that's a missed opportunity. This is something that it doesn't have, is the wild areas where you could actually, even just you taking a 2-minute walk is completely just being ignored, like it has been for years.
So just to speak to that a little, we are trying to maintain a big portion of those wild areas, the one along Pleasant Hill and the one in that corner towards Washington. And I think we would want to include in this project a sort of like cleanup. So not a clear cut, but like the removal of like trash and invasive plants like understory. So you could actually maybe walk into them a little easier, for the time being, at least until stuff grows back. Because I think maintenance is often the issue. But we don't want to ignore them completely. we want to make them a little, you know, clean them up a little, make them a little inviting, but not add explicit programming in them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll just add, yeah, we often use these capital projects as a chance to sort of do some of that maintenance that maybe doesn't always happen with the standard maintenance work. So maybe it's, you know, pruning trees, or like Megan was saying, clearing out kind of understory that might be invasive or, you know, undesirable. So that's yeah, this is kind of our chance to take care of some of those things. Oh, great. Chris, thank you for that note about the porta potty. And yeah, that's totally understandable. That is paid for by the Flag Football League. So yeah, I think that we will certainly want to supplement that, and then shouldn't be as much of an issue. So thanks for chiming in on that. We don't hold that against you. So all right, Carrie Ann.
I completely forgot my comment.
No worries.
But thank you for these designs, and I just really want, you know, for me, just to reiterate priorities: double basketball court, preserve wildlife and flexible space, porta potties, and an upgrade to the playground. I think you can't be everything to everyone, and with the dog park and the exercise places and everything like that, we're trying to be everything to everyone. And Walsh Park has historically been just a very family oriented, family friendly playground. How would we be able to enforce leash laws there? Because that is the problem. Like, that leash laws aren't enforced, and then, you know, people like my 3-year-old kid gets attacked by dogs. So
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one because, you know, the truth is, for enforcement on the park side, we really don't have the I guess capacity or authority. I mean, I think if anything, it's, you know, BPD is kind of the enforcement agency that we have to rely on, but, you know, I'm sure most people aren't inclined to necessarily call police on, you know, for dog issues. But yeah, it's certainly a tough challenge. And, you know, I think maybe one thing we can do is try to improve signage to clarify that, because I don't know that there's a lot of signage out there now with rules, now that I think of it. But we could certainly update that. You know, and we've talked with, I think in Brookline, they did a test where they had sort of leash, like off leash hours at certain fields. But they were saying the downside to that is just the dog, you know, kind of presence was somewhat destructive on like sports fields and things like that. That's something that we're sort of piloting at the Common. So the area actually moves around. That way it's having less of a negative impact on the turf. But I think that has its own challenges. So we don't necessarily have a great solution for that at this time. So, but yeah, that's a good comment as well. I see a comment in the chat about a crosswalk, a flashing light at the crosswalk. So that is outside of our jurisdiction, but BTD would be responsible for that. But we are having, you you know, conversations with them, because a lot of times when we do park renovations, we hear feedback like that, that while it's outside of the park, it obviously relates to the park. So, you know, that's a comment that I can certainly take to them, and see if we can, you know, make that. I think that's a great point. It's, I've crossed that street many times there, and it's the way cars are coming sort of around the bend. It's kind of, can be a little bit unnerving. So we can certainly, you know, look into that and see what we can coordinate with BTD about that. Okay, I think we hopefully covered everything that was in the chat, or at least generally. I think we can probably wrap it up at this point, unless, oh, let's see. Great. Just want to say thank you again, everyone, for your time and your incredibly helpful comments. So we will post this recording on the project webpage and the slides. You know, if you have any other thoughts that come into your mind, you know, feel free to email me. And then we'll send out, when we have that next meeting scheduled, where we'll try to sort of bring everything together and have one concept plan to share. I'll let you know. I'll send you an email, and yeah, thank you so much. Hope you all have a good night.